Hello, nerds.
Noosh, we'll use noosh after we do the scratches.
Cool.
So first things first, black brown, get my brush and get it to where I can do fairly small amounts of paint. And then I'm just going to kind of go along my edges. I want to just kind of take the brush and I'll just kind of press it into that edge. So as I'm doing it, I'm just pressing doots. And then I'll tie them together or add another small one, elongate it a little bit, give more natural feel to it, having torn paint off of there. It would not just be a straight line. So then I can come back over here, and once I have a nice feel for it, then I can say, okay, well, let's give that one a little more dimension, make it a little bit bigger, and drop down into the side surface a little bit more. And again, here now you can see that every time I do this, it gives a little bit more a weathered look to it, and you can go ham. You can take this too far. You can do it to your liking. But I generally start with less, just dots across the top, that the edge is broken up, and then I'll come back in and say, okay, well, what if I want to make this one, like on this thing on the front, actually have a really big chip out of it, like that. And so I'm just going to go along all the edges and do this. And it's super simple. As you can see, you don't got to work really hard at it. You just got to try to define, again, which edges would have this. And my upper-facing edges are going to be the ones that I think of first, because this is where people are going to climb up and stick their boots. And you can like leave big spaces that don't have any. And that kind of tells its own story, that that's an area that doesn't get a lot of attention. And the reason I'm not using a sponge for this, a sponge could do it, but a sponge would take you outside the edge as well. It's because you have to press hard enough to leave paint. And when you press, the sponge wraps around the edge and has a chance to put paint further. So the sponge is good for big chip details, but for small stuff like this, I like doing it with the paintbrush when I'm trying to keep the detailing more realistic. So again, wherever I have like these corners that come together, I like to really knock a bunch of weathering on there. Hopefully you can see why I did the highlight first too, because now I don't have to imagine all the highlighting I would have to do in between these scratches to keep all those edges done. If you do the highlight first, now you put the scratches on top and your highlight's perfect. So here we have some curved areas. Notice how this, like the top of the turret up here, has no hard edge, right? It's soft. We talked about how we got the highlight on there when we were doing that with the dry brush. Same thing down here. We did the same thing with the dry brush. We kind of pulled that line softly to give that edge on the radius. So for here, we're going to have to kind of, I've got my paintbrush in a chisel shape. It's flat in one direction, knife's edge in the other. I want to take the flat side of it and start with my weathering along this, because you can imagine like maybe there'll be a little bit where I have my highlight as I move up towards the front, and then I probably get more and more as I get up here, and maybe this corner. You can imagine like your sides of your shoes get worn. You know, maybe I've got a bigger amount of scratching going on up here, and you just kind of want to rotate the brush along as you do this so that not all of your scratches look uniform. And you can see how setting it inside that highlight already also highlights the scratch. But having a different dimension, having it be more damage towards the part that would hit things first. You know, when you're walking, the front of your shoe hits stuff before the heel does. So there'd be less damage towards the back. There wouldn't be anything hitting back here. So it's fine to not have any battle damage on that. So now it gives the motion of travel to the vehicle, because I have all of my scratches loaded up front on the top of the foot and then on this ankle part, and then they taper as they go back. So that has its own, see how that storytelling works? You can tell where the brunt of stuff hits this model. It hits at the front. The chip of paint that's left is a spot that's like now got just primer showing through. So what we're seeing here is that this tank was primered black-brown. And if it were primered black-brown, what would that do if the primer was also rubbed away in the formation of the scratch? It would mean that at the deepest part of the scratch, we might have a little rust. We'll grab some orange oxide. And so, you know, we've had this, maybe the top of this foot area has hit stuff so many times in the same place because of how this thing walks, that it's rubbed us away to like bare metal, but only right here at the very front corner, because that's the impact point for like everything. Leading away from it, tap it with your finger. But I wouldn't do this whole edge that way, because none of the rest of this would have gone down to bare metal. So same thing, like up at the front of this foot where it looks like, you know, we've got it hitting into stuff all the time. Same thing. Just go ahead and you can pick some areas and do some deets and doots inside of your black brown. You don't want to lose your black brown. Now, one thing to realize is that an edge that is constantly hitting stuff while we're doing this orange oxide on them, a lot of times that edge would be raw steel, because if it's an active tank, this area that has rust, I will go back in and I will highlight the inside of that rust area so that it is raw metal. If you wanted to, you could use metallic paints for that. We won't do metallic paints on this guy. You can imagine, like, if you've got something painted over like a number and such, that when you scratch the number, you get the paint underneath. By doing it with the brown, what I'm doing is making the scratch go all the way through 2 layers of paint into the undercoat color. What we're going to do is, this is a piece of pluck foam. So in our go bags, we have pluck foam trays that you can pop pluck foam out of in the go bag mini. And I always recommend you saving some because they're a very useful tool when painting. And so when you tear it, like, right, you can start picking it and get this really cool random, alien moon texture out of it. I'll just pick a bunch of, and now I've got a, just a undefined texture there. You can see all the peaks and valleys and such. And then I'm going to take a pair of curved forceps, right? And I get the locking forceps style, so I have the teeth that lock at the bottom. So now I can hold this up here. I don't have to clench, the thing together. It's a little annoying if you have to do that. But now I have this cool random surface that is, got all sorts of, as I move around, you can imagine me touching different areas of this sponge onto a surface. I'm going to get a very randomized pattern of deets and doots. So it's going to give me very small details. So if I take this and go put it over into our black brown, so take that over to your tank. And then if I come in and just kind of barely smack it on there, and it has hardly any paint on it, then you notice see how it starts darkening up this upper corner? But it's very slight. And again, I'm probably overdoing what I would want to on this tank, but that's fine. It'll be nice and weathered at the end of the day. We've done a lot of the filtering with the airbrush. The way that we did our panel airbrushing gave us a really good filter already. You notice how we've got dark shadows on the bottom of the panels, and the way that we did it with the airbrush makes it look like that is kind of grit and grime built up. So it's kind of a pre-weathering, if you will. This is what it looked like after the airbrush and then some edge highlighting. So even when it's clean and doesn't have a whole lot of chipping going on, which this side I haven't chipped other than to show you the sponge technique, still get this kind of dirty look because of that. So we don't have to do an overall filter. But we will be using filters for things like adding environmental color, oxidation to the paint. Obviously, this is not a junkyard tank. It's still in operation, so we don't want to overdo it. First things I like to do is kind of look around and make sure that we have darkness where we want it with regards to the kind of shading around. Places where we might do like a general wash are going to be places that I want to start with, because that kind of oily grit inside of nooks and crannies and around like washers and nuts and things like that, I'm going to want to do those first before we add in all the coloring on top. We'll start with a black brown, and I'm going to add in, I don't know, how about we say 1, 2, 3 drops of paint. Actually 4. And then we're going to do a very scientific mixing process of about that much noosh. And then a little bit of water. A little dab will do you. So the whole idea with noosh is that I can put it on the model, and then I can go back and move it around. So see, I can dab this on in this big area with kind of out without really having a care. See how sloppy that is? Then clean my brush off real quick and come back with the brush and just kind of smooge that around. And so now it does act like a filter. And then I can just kind of pull it down to the bottom. So now I have this kind of dirty, streaky shadow. And I can do that along any area I need to. If I want to darken this line in here, I can just paint along that edge like so, and that would not look good, but I can grab a wet brush, and then with that wet brush just kind of grab it, come back in here, filter it out over the top, use my finger, wipe it if I need to, and now I get a much more natural dark line that blends out to the surrounding panel. And you can see the difference in the darkness around the front edge here and over here where it doesn't exist. So immediate shading that keeps me from having to do something like a traditional wargaming wash. And I'll just keep doing that. I'll have like maybe some built up around this little panel here. Paint a little bit around it. Clean my brush off. Leave my brush damp. And then just kind of push the brush up into the edge and then back out. And then that'll kind of stipple the edge around there. And then I can take my Q-tip and just kind of pull that color around how you want. And then we get a nice shading in and around that panel piece. All done with acrylics. That's the nice thing about Noosh, is that you wouldn't be able to do this with acrylics any other way. Because see, you'll get that, see how that wetness is like that? You don't want to let that wetness dry like that. You want to kind of just touch and blot the edges around, so that any pigmentation that's in there also just kind of gets smudged out and thinned out into the surface, like so. That way all of the darkness is built up on the inside, but it does leave a little bit of that weathering will come out away from it, so it doesn't just look like you painted a line. And I'm not pressing hard at all. You don't want to press very hard. You don't want to tear your paint or anything else. You can move pretty quick along the model by doing this. You can see I don't have that shading, but look at how quick, without any kind of knowledge of blending or anything, how great I got that to look. It looks like a dirty, oily surface where that grit has run due to rain or whatever else. And this is nothing you have to be, you don't have any special education on how to do this. You're literally just, in this case, we're just painting around the lines, the raised panel lines, with Noosh. So I'm just going to kind of take the Noosh mix and do the 270-ish degrees around the bottom here. Clean the brush. Brush is now just damp with water, no more paint on there. And then just kind of run it in there. Now this is starting to get to a point where we're doing this in a way more detailed way than you might normally do. So I'm going to take some of the black brown, hit these rivets. And this is more like a traditional wash. Then I just take the Q-tip and kind of hit the top of them with a little downward stroke. Like in a lot of cases, you might just hit this with like a black wash to do the same deal on the rivets. And you wouldn't be wrong in doing that. But you can see how powerful this is just using it as a specific placement color. And play around, and you can see the impact of like that ankle and the darkness that we get versus over here. Again, I'm going to take quite a bit of this now and build it and load it up towards the bottom of this little wheel here, like so. Then clean the brush and take that wet brush stroke and bring it down to the bottom. Then wipe it off on my finger so I get rid of the pigment that's on the brush. Again, bring that big brush stroke down to the bottom. Same thing back here. Just give that right in the crack. Take the wet brush and just kind of grab that edge and pull that edge over like this. It'll blend automatically out into the surrounding, and then you see me just take my finger and rub it up and down there. And now see how that kind of fuzzy shadow comes out from the crack? Makes it a lot more natural than just a panel line. Right now I'm using it like we're talking about, kind of as a panel wash, but one that I get to direct where I want it. Nooks and crannies, darkening panels up as I need to, so I can use it as a filter if I have to, whatever I need. Because a lot of your weathering technique is adding what is pretty much shading back in. Now on something like this, I'm going to treat it like a wet blend, and then I'm going to come back with my clean brush and just kind of do these sideways motions and push that up into the crevice, clean the brush off, and then bring it out of the crevice over the whole surface. Repeat that over here. Again, I've just got a wet brush. Start making horizontal stripes. Boom. Now I have a completely blended area on the top there. Whereas on the sides, we already have that. The airbrush did that. On the top panels where we were doing our brightest color, that doesn't exist. And the nice thing about Noosh too is that now we're ready to paint over it. So unlike an oil, if we did this with all oil filters, the oil filters wouldn't be ready to go again. Just do a couple of drops, 3 drops of yellow ochre. So bold titanium white. Making individual cups of these, not mixing them together. So same thing, we'll just do like 3, maybe 4 drops of bold titanium white. All right, and then I want some warm gray, I believe. Let me get warm grays. So this is for oxidation, brownish, earthy tone dirts, and grayish neutral dirts. Again, Noosh, the magic. This is what makes it all possible. I've done 3 drops of each of these. I think 4 of the titanium white. So let's try to measure a little bit better. So I'll do 20 drops of Noosh, about 5 to 1. Over here, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and a lot more. Just to show you there's no real scientific method to this. I would say that you just want something in the neighborhood of about 5 to 1 to start and find your opacity and working time. Noosh is a little bit different than other ways of thinning because not only are you looking to get it thin visually, you want to be able to have it be semi-opaque to work with, but it also, the more you add, the more work time you get. And then water-wise, we want to come over here and do a little squirt of water in each of these. And we want to stir them up with the butt end of a brush. So I'm going to get some water on my brush. Then I get a little bit of the gray paint with the Noosh. And I'm just going to quickly dab some of that around. Then I'm going to get my brush wet and just streak that on the model. So I'll just put some of that on there and then immediately start kind of squibbing up and down with it over the panel. And I'll just go in sections, and it's adding a little bit of brightness into the middle there. Now you want to keep your brush strokes going with gravity in most cases. I'm going to go ahead and take my finger and kind of wipe along my white line there. The idea here is just to randomly place it around so that your paint is starting from a different location. I like doing this because it gives me more intensity wherever the dot started. Right now, I'm going to go in with some of the yellow. Same thing. And I just kind of want to rinse my brush out real quick. Same deal. So intentionally staying away from that and kind of dab my finger along the bottom. Bring a little bit over into our white, but not much. Look at this versus this. Same exact coloration of the tank, but what's different about the green up here, look at that yellow filter versus here. And because we're doing this layered, we did the gray first, yellow second, and you don't have to do the yellow everywhere. So that you'll get a mix of colors that make all these panels get the feel of being weathered slightly differently. So next is white. White I just kind of want up at the top. Wipe it off. And this one I'm going to use a reverse stroke and take all the white up to the top edge. Kind of keep it in pockets so it's just like right there. And then over here. See how we catch that little bit of oxidation now on the side that's just in this pocket here. A little bit up towards this edge, a little bit towards the back, and the yellow in between. So that variation is what really starts giving it its character, like it's been outside, things that you can't create easily any other way. Yeah, and you can see that beginning of oxidation. Again, that modulation, you can start seeing it up here, that cloudiness here. Now it's gone. You don't have that here. Again, just kind of stipple along a line where I want this color to originate from. Clean my brush off, and then come back and streak that around. It's hard to tell once you get past a point because everything starts looking so much different because of the weathering, right? But you can see that the color here has been faded a little bit, as it does when it's outside. And here the green is way more put together on this side, even though we do have the weathering baked in with the airbrush. So let's say I've got just a little bit I want to do over here. Maybe I skip this panel and put some over here. The variation between panels makes it look like maybe this one got replaced. If you have a little bit of yellow like on this one and this one doesn't. Even on these top flat surfaces here, this is where I'll do more smudging. So I'll just kind of stipple some around there. I'm going to grab a different brush that I brought in for this. Just kind of get a little bit damp. Right? And this brush, I just kind of smoosh the paint around. then just like everything else, but except that I'm pushing the white to the top rather than pulling it to the bottom like I have with all the other colors. And then I won't use any white down below this kind of top of the leg spot. I won't use it down on the low spots. And then heavier up towards the top of the turret up here. Now it is from streaking. I'm trying to create with what I'm about to do here the idea that this could be cleaned off, wiped off. It's a oil drip. It's a rust streak. I've got some black brown here. So we'll start with some thinned out black brown. And again, you know, if I do a drop like right on this one, like so, and then just go get my brush filled with water and then just streak it down. And let it create the shape of the droplet on its own. I'm going to move over to another one here and do the same thing. I'm just going to put more material on this one, right up underneath that rivet. Then go get my paintbrush, water, and pull that straight down. Because I can pull the streaks like this. Then go clean my brush and come back and blend that streak out. So I could very quickly do one right here. I should hold this the right way, right? And like have it kind of
come from the paint.
Streak from where that chip is. Then get my wet brush and just kind of feather that down. And now we're creating that weeping feel. You don't have to do much of it at all. You can do a ton. Again, like with anything, it's going to create a, you know, an overly dirty feel if you're not super careful. Like this chip up here in the white, I can feel like the chip kind of comes down at an angle, and then maybe we've got a, you know, a tail of drip that comes out of that. And then again, just take my brush loaded with water and hit that drip and till it fades away at the end. And the brush actually took the paint out of the middle and pushed it to the side, so it looks like I have two drips. Some burnt orange. Again, just a couple. We don't need a ton of this. 3 drops of paint should be enough. And again, our fantastic scientific mixing method. Then I can take some of my orange and follow up right on top of like this little streak that I did coming out of the chip. Pull a little tail of the orange in there. And again, just take the wet brush and blend that out and down. And pull it all the way down and thick on there like that if you want. Then take the damp, clean brush and wipe it back in. And then this one I can feather out to everything else around it so we get a little bit of that rusty feel to the surface next to it. Little chipping. Let's just do some stippling of the orange in this area over the black-brown chips. And then take the wet brush. Let's get our bigger brush here. And smudge this. I'm just going to hit the brush against these, right? I'm just going to go like this. Bam. So I can create the idea of a little bit of rust and not have to make it overly rusty. I'm going to take some of this orange again and just kind of stipple it over this area right along the yellow, because I've got this neat amount of chipping right there, but I also have this yellow chevron. And then again, take my smudge brush and just smudge that around that area. As I go along the length of the barrel, I'm hitting certain areas at the peak of the cylinder up here with little droplets, and then I'll skip some space. Then I'll come back with the clean wet brush and just streak off of that center, and then take that brush, clean it off on my thumb real quick, and then use it to spread color left and right to the next clump. You know, it just kind of modulates it randomly across the barrel like that. And that gives me a good amount of weathering. And then I can kind of come back and along the bottom shade this whole area with some of the noosh as well. Just kind of paint as if the, you know, whatever drips around a cylinder collects on the bottom. So I'll paint it along the bottom, then come back again with a clean wet brush and just kind of smudge that around. And again, I don't want to do overly rusty, but I might, like on these bigger chips up here, put a deet there and doot there. And then across the top here, I might do just a little couple doots everywhere, every now and then. Again, I don't want a lot, and I'm putting them not necessarily where the rust was, but in their own areas, and then that clean wet brush and just kind of squib that around. That's not a streaking thing. That's more of a highlight and baked paint feeling thing. Now it's time for details. So faded green is the brightest color we've used on here, and that's what we're going to use again. So what you're going to see me do now is with the faded green, we're going to come back in and start doing little deets and doots to give me highlights on some of these bigger chips. Now I'm not going to have to do it everywhere, but anywhere I have like a bunch of little black dots from either the sponge or my own paintbrush, notice how doing those little pushes of brightness underneath at the bottom edge of those dots gives a dimension to it. See those dimples? Like it's like picking the light at the bottom edge where it has chipped. And I also want to catch like the top of redo some of these rivets where we've put weathering on them. So again, you can see I'm just going around and I'm highlighting even like these chips that come over the corner here, highlight the bottom edge of that. But now look at how detailed that panel is. The dot filters that we've done, the drips, and now the secondary highlight. Hold that picture framed in your mind. And then look at where we started and how flat this looks. Even though we spent the time to airbrush it carefully and got all the shading built in with the airbrush, just look how flat that looks. And when we started, you were like, oh, it looks done. The smallest amount of paint makes the biggest amount of influence on any model you do when done right. That's the problem. It is definitely a less is more. And everybody laughs at that. They're like, no, more is more. That's a stupid saying. I'm like, no, it's not. Less gives you more here, because the more you add, the less or the more you detract from the whole picture. And the hard part with that is that you only learn that by doing it, right? By saying, you know what, I should have stopped. Because you might say, oh, I'm glad I didn't touch that. Especially when stuff looks good. Especially, weathering is one of the hardest things in the world to know when enough is enough, because you'll see it and you'll be like, oh, that looks badass, man. That scratch and scrape there is rad. I should do another one. It'll look even better. And then two of them look like absolute butt. Yep. I can use this same faded green to highlight all of the colors on here. I'm doing that side panel there. Just a string of doots so it looks like, something scraped along the side. And I'm getting my brush. If you've been here for long, you know that I teach you to take your round brush and flatten it into a chisel shape, flatter in this direction, and then knife's edge here. So that chisel. And I'm using the chisel edge to do my lines, not the sharp edge. And just kind of lightly, barely any brush pressure here at all, and just deets and doots as I go across here. Again, this is the smallest amount of paint you'll ever paint on anything, is when you're doing this kind of stuff. You're just taking like the corner of that chisel tip. So we started with the airbrushed base coating that already kind of pre-baked in some weathering. You paint the whole tank the base color, dark camo green. Then you come in and you start with your next color and you just paint this panel, and then this panel, and then this panel, and then this panel. And you just airbrush inside those panels. And by doing so, it leaves darkness around the edge of each panel as you pull the brighter color towards the center. And by modulating color inside each panel, you get this pre-baked weathering. It looks used. So this is the simplest way to get a head start on any vehicle or piece of armor, dreadnought, anything you're painting that has big and is sectioned off in panels like this, with just that airbrushing done with 3 colors, and then a dry brush over the top of the faded green to give me some highlights. And then I went back and added some lines for highlight to show along the way. Then, of course, we did some freehand detailing of decals and such, and the barrel treatment and things like that. You would add all of those things in, whether they were wet transfers or freehand. You would add those on after you've done your base coat and your dry brush highlighting. Then after you've done your dry brush and your highlight, you move into your weathering and your filters. And what you want to do is start taking the paint and layering it into things like panel washes, where you start darkening the lines in between the panels. Where you'll see, like over here, I have a pretty good starting darkness, but here I've gone in with the black brown and layered the black brown into those panel lines. Then I started going in and using the same colors mixed with our noosh. Then we started doing streaking. And the streaking was as easy as putting some dots on there and streaking down, doing the dot filters where I would rub some black brown onto an area, some yellow, some white, so And then the streaks, and then finally finish up with the highlights, where we go in and do the deets and the doots. And we go in and just do small dots and lines to underscore all of those black scratch marks on there, and you're done. Noosh, 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 noosh.